Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and all points in between. It's me, Jordan, your resident lore master and storyteller extraordinaire, here today for our debut episode on YouTube down here at the Gamers Den. We're going to be talking about something for which every single tabletop dungeon master, GM, or storyteller is going to be absolutely essential, and that is preparation. So let's just get right to it then. Now, how do you go about preparing for a tabletop game? Whatever game you're playing, whatever the setting and rule set it may actually have, you need to be familiar with both. Especially if you're going to be running this game for your players and putting together adventures for them to go through. Now, do you need to know every single last rule down to the last minute detail? No. Being familiar helps, but you don't need to go to that extreme in most cases. Whether it's Pathfinder, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, Shadowrun, or Rollmaster, you just need to be familiar enough with the rules in order to be able to run the game. And the main reason for this is because you are going to be the arbiter. You're going to be making judgment calls on any issues that happen to come up over the course of play. So, knowing those rules is absolutely going to help. Uh, with that said, though, once you're familiar with the rules, be prepared to throw them out the window from time to time. That's mostly going to be because, while the rules help to set up the framework and provide the functions for moving the game forwards, there's plenty of stuff that doesn't quite fit so neatly within the rules. So, in those cases, you're just going to have to be familiar enough and use your best judgment to come up with an answer to keep the game going ahead in the moment there. Don't, don't, absolutely do not stop the game, take 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, or whatever to just sit down, crack open a book, and start looking through the rules. That's when your players start getting pulled out of the game, that breaks immersion, and they just start to lose interest. Don't be a rules lawyer. Just make the best call, and if it's important enough to you that you feel like you need to know it in the future, look it up later. Don't waste time digging through a rule book just because you can't remember how this one particular thing works right off the top of your head. Worst comes to worst, just talk it over with your players and just say, hey, let's go with this for now, and then we'll fix it later. More often than not, that's going to be satisfactory. Just as an example, in a long-running campaign that started back in 3.5 D&D and has now progressed on up into Pathfinder, one of my players has rolled and has been playing this wizard named Oz, and during one particular battle, especially once we were hitting that culmination over the course of events in this particular place, he had asked about how a vampire's gaseous form works and whether or not a spell like Cone of Cold would affect it. Now, given that given that by the basic rules in themselves for the gaseous form spell, there's quite a bit of damage reduction that gets added in. And in the case of vampires, where it's a magical ability, doing more damage to them is just about impossible. But he was fine with not dealing extra damage, just wondering if the mist would be affected by a more significant spell like Cone of Cold, like say if it would be frozen or slowed even. Now, strictly by the rules, especially now that I've looked it up and I know quite a bit more about that particular function, it'd be a no. But I liked the idea, especially at the time, and it wasn't a high level vampire, so I let him go ahead and do it, even though I didn't quite know where he was going, but I had a few ideas, and like I said, I liked it. So he cast the spell, and the I rolled a fortitude save for the vampire, or I rolled a save, might have been fortitude, might have been will, but the point was the vampire rolled incredibly low and ended up frozen in place. And then he used his wand of stone shape, flipped out a spell real quick, trapped the mist inside the stone, and just buried it under several feet of just solid stone, and just left it there for the remaining century, or for the upcoming centuries to suffer. It was fantastic. Now, was it strictly by the rules? No. But was it awesome and made some kind of sense? Yeah, yeah, or at least enough sense for me. I liked it, so it was good enough at the time. But anyways, that's going to be another thing right there. Preparation ahead of time is going to allow you to be more flexible in dealing with those dastardly players. I mean, those crafty bastards have a habit of derailing things or coming up with something unexpected. So you need to be ready to adapt on the fly when those players do something to unravel your plot or stop advancing the plot. Sometimes it's going to be, more often than not, actually, it's going to be something you just didn't anticipate. Something like shutting off the lights and trapping somebody in a dark room gives all they need to take advantage of a situation. And how do you make yourself extra prepared for this? Details. Detail, detail, and yet more detail. Without detail, your campaigns, they're just going to feel lifeless. Without detail, your NPCs are just going to be so bland and forgettable. You need details in order to bring your world alive and make it seem like it's more engaging, make the story more engaging, and it will give you that extra level of flexibility in dealing with players who may be off exploring, not advancing the plot, or derailing the campaign intentionally or otherwise. These details are going to help provide a more clear context and direction for the players to follow too, and is going to serve to make more memorable events over the course of play. The type of things where players remember it for months, possibly even years afterwards, once you get more practice with this and set up just these really cool things to have happen in your campaign. As another example of what not to do, I had played a single adventure in what was supposed to be a long running campaign. An old friend of mine had come up with this. He had just gotten out of the Marine Corps, said he'd been playing with people back in the Marines on the barracks and perfecting his story and creating this in-depth engaging story. He'd wanted to do this Asian martial arts kind of styled campaign, and he'd had, like I said, the story was supposed to have already been set up. And we had never really quite done anything like this at the time, from high school all the way up through the college years. So I was pretty jazzed to play this. I mean, I've been a martial artist for a number of years myself. I was excited at the prospect. But for this particular instance, since everybody else was going to be rolling monks or some variant of a close combat type, I asked if I could make a wizard for this setting. The reason for a wizard being at this monastery, this martial arts temple full of monks, was my wizard was going to be an especially scholarly sort, not just magic, but philosophy, education, histories, and the temple, with its quiet martial discipline as well as the extensive library they had, would make a perfect place for him to be learning, to be studying, even if it was just going to be a temporary thing. Uh, the storyteller agreed, and he let me roll the character. And then our setting started off midday in the monastery. Monks in the courtyard, practicing, drilling with weapons, sparring against one another, when one of the finest students, my friend's character, was called into the main temple, where the head of his order revealed that their temple's sacred idol had been stolen. As the finest student, he was going to be tasked with picking a few others to help him to go out and retrieve the idol. I was asked, or my character was asked, to go along with him and add in some mystical edge to help them be be successful in this venture. And that's when a thought occurred to me, and I said, "Oh, hey, quick question for you. What does this idol look like? What is this symbol that we are looking for?" My friend said, "Oh, uh, well, I haven't figured that out yet. The entire crux of the campaign, the MacGuffin that we're after, the object that we are supposed to find, and he hadn't figured out what it even looked like yet." uh, it was a bit odd, especially since he made a point of talking about how prominently displayed this particular symbol was. It was emblazoned on the banners, on the doorways, tattooed into the flesh of the monks. It was everywhere, but you know what, whatever, we just rolled with it. We just wanted to keep the story going. We were together to play, and we wanted to play. And, well, we leave the temple, progressing down the mountainside. Oh, that was another thing he'd forgotten to tell us. The temple was up on a mountain, so we're making our way down this rocky mountain path, down into tall grasses and massive trees. Very Asiatic, sort of jungle-ish kind of terrain up in the mountains there. And as we're making our way through down, we end up rolling on a random encounter with a lion. Not a tiger, not a panther, or some other sort of jungle cat, but a plains dwelling animal. But again, whatever. We rolled with it. We figured we just chalked it up to using a pre made random encounter chart for wildlife. A bit odd, but you know what? Nothing to worry about. Something at least happened in the campaign, so we kept going. And that's when we made our way down to Town 2. Yeah, he didn't figure out the name for that either. Town 2, incidentally as it is, had its own martial arts temple. No name for their order, no real clear depiction of their kung fu style, and yeah, he didn't have their symbol figured out either. Um, at this point, I just kind of wrote off the campaign. I wasn't having fun anymore. I was not engaged. It was clearly going to be the same thing that we were doing back in high school, just a slightly different flavor. So I started making my own fun as things got progressively worse and worse. Um, we learned nothing in this town, and except that the monks weren't friendly and would not let us in their temple, even on the basis of a martial arts challenge from somebody who was on their way to being a master. You know, the thing that's been the bread and butter of every single kung fu movie since, I don't know, ever. Anyways, we set out across on a poorly detailed, drab roadway across a gray, lifeless plainscape until we got to Town 3. No, I'm sorry, Town 2. See, I forget the details because there are no details. Suffice it to say, Town 2 had three martial arts temples in it. Two of the temples had their idols stolen, and they were in quite an uproar over this, ransacking the town, fighting each other, accusing one another. The third temple, for some reason, they weren't attacking it or engaging with them, but we go there and we find everybody dead, bodies scattered everywhere. And I thought, oh hey, maybe this is where things are going to pick up. I mean, this is interesting. This is a bit of a change. I'll take it. And we start investigating. We roll dice to see what we can pull together here. And the clue that we got was everybody here has been murdered in a different way. There were 80 dead monks. Of course, they'd been murdered in a different way. That's just par for the course when a large group of people are resisting an attack. You're going to be murdered in different fashions. You're all going to die in different ways. I mean, come on, that's nothing that we need to pull out a die roll for. That's just readily apparent. But I know what he was going for in this instance. He was going for that, this gang of martial arts masters, each with their own unique style and discipline and weapons for finishing off their opponents. Uh, that would have been cool, but he didn't do that. If he had put out details like some of the bodies had red fletched arrows and they had these horrible wounds puckering with some awful poison, or there's a broken axe head with a strange symbol above a coiling snake. Those are clues. That's detail. That points out the uniqueness in the fight. That makes it a little bit different. Those can be identifiers for later on in the adventure as our characters are making their investigation. Sorry, that short-lived story still irritates the hell out of me. Suffice it to say, we never really got anywhere after that, and we ended up never playing it again. And that actually, shortly thereafter that, we kind of end up didn't keep playing together. We just broke off into our own separate little groups. But anyways, this, like I said before, should serve as an example of what not to do over the course of a campaign. And when I tell you that hammering out these details and preparing ahead of time are important, please absolutely take it to heart and root it firmly into your mind. And think about your campaigns just even a little bit beforehand. Iron out those crucial elements, like, if there's a particular item that your players need to go and retrieve, figure out what that item is. Figure it out ahead of time. Or if it's going to be a ruse and they're told they're supposed to find one thing, but they get to location A and find that item A is really item B, figure that all out ahead of time. And and when you're coming up with these adventures and putting these details in, start out big. Start out big and go from a wider angle. Is the how big you start out on figuring out this world and this plot is going to depend on the scope of the adventure you have in mind. For example, is this going to be localized in one city, town, and its surrounding region, the immediate area? Or is this going to be an adventure that takes the characters all across this country through different nations and cities? And, figure out that ahead of time. And then, once you've figured out your starting location, the starting location for your adventure, go into the city or town and start figuring out some of the details of the city. And what are its features? What are some of the prominent locations? Is it a clean and well maintained place, or has it fallen into disrepair and become decrepit just from years of neglect, poverty, or just outright pollution, or the destructive ravages of war? Is the city large enough that maybe you'll find a little bit of both depending on which district you go to? And what are the sounds of this city? They're going to vary from district to district. If you're going to the market square, it's going to be featuring this oppressive mass of people moving about in seemingly all directions, with customers, workers, and merchants barking out their wares and displaying them out for the public to take in. There's going to be just a veritable medley of scents that commingle in the air, both pleasant and foul. There's going to be police or city guardsmen patrolling the market square, providing protection against gangs or thieves, possibly even acting as strongmen themselves for particular merchant factions, depending on if the city has a corrupt government or not. And then you go a little bit further in from there. You start focusing in on some of the finer details. As an example, the characters make their way in through the Pike Place Market in Seattle, past all the stalls and the business owners out front, into the building as this gray overcast day starts turning into a heavier drizzle. And once they make their way inside the old building, they see this little out of the way shop in the corner. It has a heavy wooden door with a small window, largely obscuring their view inside with this flickering neon sign that indicates the place is open. And when they do open the door, it just creaks and groans wearily, revealing the interior to be this warmly lit shop, festooned with all these arcane knickknacks. And once they get to the counter, leaning on this glass case that's full of these skulls of different shapes and sizes, decorated with different ink patterns. They see this middle-aged, dark-skinned man leaning over the case, wearing an old-aged black coat from a very fine suit, and atop his head is a dusty top hat. And this kind of detail makes things more memorable. That character will stick in your mind easier because you can form a clearer picture of what that character is like. And it kind of went with the whole Baron Samedi motif, but even still, it's a classic image, it's a classic kind of character. Create that kind of detail to make those memorable characters. And for the love of God, absolutely write this stuff down. And this amount of detail is helpful, but it's also hard to remember just off the top of your head. Writing it down will help you keep it consistent and make your world consistent, and thus help prevent from your players becoming disillusioned or breaking immersion as you realize, oh crap, you mixed up details of two different characters. This orange-skinned monstrosity that came after them this time around, oh, they met him before, but he had blue skin last time, didn't he? So write this stuff down and, almost keep it like a running log where if you do introduce some NPCs, note some of the events that happen to them over the course of play. As the players grow and change and their characters evolve, so too are the NPCs they're gonna interact with. The ones that just don't end up dead anyways. Or in some cases, even the ones that do end up dead. They may come back as spirits or what have you. In either case, write this stuff down. And also, by starting out with this wider view of the world and working further inwards onto these finer details, you will start to make this more immersive and believable, ever changing world. With these added details prepared ahead of time, you are going to be able to have a ready answer at hand if a player decides to divert off the main campaign and explore something off to the side. Instead of having to scramble and come up with something off the top of your head. If you've got some experience playing and running adventures, it's easier to do that, but even still, it's 10 times easier to just have a few extra things written out. And this way, you also don't have to just forcibly railroad the players back into place. Oh, and that's another thing to not do. Don't just railroad your players. Railroading just makes them feel like the adventure is, well, on rails, like they can't explore, like there's nothing outside of the set track. And that also breaks immersion. It breaks it faster and makes games just a fair bit more disappointing. Like with the example of that awful campaign before, there wasn't a whole lot of room for delineation from the main track that we were on. There wasn't any exploring. There weren't any extra activities. The martial arts challenge that happened because Matt had nothing planned. He didn't have NPC statistics figured out. He didn't have anything set up to allow for a martial arts challenge to happen inside of a martial arts focused game. So having these extra details will help to prevent railroading. The answer is always going to be details, details, details. Well, and with that, well, I think we've concluded our first episode here. I'm hoping that this will be a longer running series, helping DMs to be better DMs and storytellers and creating better and better campaigns. We'll have other subjects coming up, such as coming up with engaging plots for your players to work with, making interesting NPCs and better detailed NPCs. I'm also looking to do a couple of videos, maybe even a short series where I I help players create better characters as well as just kind of being better players in regards to working with the DM. And, well, hopefully we'll have plenty more content for you coming down the pipe here. I have been Jordan, your resident lore master and storyteller extraordinaire. Thanks for joining me. Have a good night. We'll see you around.